Hi everybody, we've understood how a tariff works. Let's now understand how an import quota works. We know what a quota is. It's a quantity limit placed on the number of imports coming into a country. Let's analyse how a quota impacts on a market. So again, we started with free trade, always a good starting point for these protectionism diagrams. Q1 is a domestic supply at the price PW. Q2 is a domestic demand at the price PW. We're all happy with that. Let's now assume that an import quota was put in place by the government. Okay? And let's say that quota was set at, call it Q3. So previously, Q1, Q2, the difference between the two, the number of imports coming into the country, that was the excess demand. Now, the government is saying now, only up to Q3 are the level of imports allowed. So before Q1, Q2 imports, now only Q1, Q3. So the level of imports, quantity of imports, is now capped at Q1, Q3 only. Okay, what does that do? It leaves an excess demand, doesn't it, of Q3 and Q2. And normally excess demands and free trade will be satisfied by imports, but we can't anymore because as a nation we've already hit our quota. We can't import anything beyond Q3. So what happens? Well, now there is an excess demand, that puts a lot of pressure on the price. That leads to an increase in price in the market, and it pushes up the price. Okay? So on a diagram, what you need to do, you pick your quantity value, you pick your quota value, you then go up to the domestic supply curve, and you go across. Okay? So that level there is the new price. Call that PW plus quota. Okay, so the new price is hit there, and at that new price, new suppliers enter the market. They're incentivized by the higher price. We have more domestic suppliers that come in. So what you need to make sure you do now is connect these 2 points together to show a shift of supply. Okay, so we'll call that SD with the quota, and that comes about through the incentives of the price mechanism. Alright? So it means that domestic suppliers now supply up to Q4, and there is a contraction of demand. Okay? So let's now analyse this diagram. So with this higher price, because of the excess demand needing to be rationed, what's going on? Well, domestic suppliers have increased their supply. They were just supplying Q1, but now they're supplying Q1, but they're also supplying the difference between Q3 and Q4. That's the new addition now. What's happened to domestic demand? Domestic demand has contracted from Q2 to Q4 because of this higher price, less consumer demand coming in. What about efficiencies and consumer surplus losses? Well, because there is a price increase, there is a deadweight loss again of consumer surplus. It works in exactly the same way as it did with the tariff diagram, so it's the same triangle. That is a deadweight welfare loss of consumer surplus. Again, you can work out the different consumer surplus areas, and you realise it's very much the same as it was with the tariff. Okay, and that is the deadweight loss, the unrecovered loss. There is also a loss of world efficiency here, and that loss of world efficiency comes from the extra units that domestic suppliers are producing that they shouldn't be producing, because they're inefficient compared to foreign producers who have the comparative advantage. So that there, that triangle, is a deadweight loss of efficiency, let's just call it that. Okay, so that's a deadweight welfare loss, a loss of efficiency, as domestic suppliers are producing at a higher cost. Remember, supply tells you the marginal cost. They're supplying these units at a higher cost than what it would have cost world suppliers. They need more resources. They need a greater price, a greater cost to produce these units compared to world suppliers who are way more efficient, who have the comparative advantage here. So that is a quota diagram. Again, I'm going to make one more video which dissects this diagram in crazy detail, which gives you everything you need to know. So if you want to understand this more in detail, watch that next video to gain full understanding of it. But what you need to take away from this, that's all you need to draw in an exam. The impact on domestic demand, on domestic supply, on imports and on price, and then finally the impacts on efficiency and consumer surplus. That's all you need to take away and you'll be fine. We then look at the arguments, okay, for protectionism. Like I did with tariff, we can apply these to the diagram again. The argument of protecting infant industries and letting them grow. Well, we've increased the production for domestic suppliers, haven't we? From Q1 to Q3, well, still Q1, but Q1 plus Q3, Q4 is being supplied domestically, so there's an increase in production there, maybe allowing these firms to benefit from more economies of scale. The dumping argument, selling below cost of production, well now with this higher price for imports coming in, you're negating some of that dumping effect. Protecting domestic employment, again with more domestic supply we can expect employment to at worst stay the same, but most likely increase. Low cost labour, if that's an argument to protect against low cost labour and the artificial advantage that comes from that, well again with a higher price you kind of dampen that argument, you dampen the advantage that comes from it. And maybe the protectionism is used to improve the current account position. Well obviously here imports are being heavily restricted, so you'd hope that import expenditure would decrease enough to improve a nation's current account position. Keep your eye out for the next video. We'll go through this in more detail. Thanks very much for watching. See you next time.